This will be the last video for the installation of the boats on my model of HMS hood. In today's video, I'll be installing the 32-foot cutter, the 30-foot gig, and the two 27-foot whalers. I will actually be working with some photo etch in this video. The 27-foot whalers have davits that need to be attached to the side of the ship. These are provided by the Super Detail upgrade kit from FlyHawk. I'm going to start with the smallest boat, that would be the 27-foot whalers, and work my way up. All of these boats are from MicroMaster. They are highly detailed 3D printed components. For all of the boats that I'm going to be painting today, there is no construction required. It's a matter of removing the boat from its base, then painting it and installing it on the ship. I have removed a lot of these boats from the base by now. I found it quite surprising how rough you can actually be with breaking off these supports. For all of these boats, I found the best way to go about it is to use tweezers to break off the supports that are attached to the more finer details like propellers and rudders and keels. And then once those are disconnected, to use pliers to rip through all of the supports simultaneously and then remove the entire boat from the base. Once the boat is removed from the base, it can be flipped upside down, and the supports that are still attached to the hull can be easily removed. For all of these boats, there are also supports inside the hull, so those also need to be snapped off at the same time. For these ones, using tweezers works best. After getting all the supports off the boat, I do a little bit of cleanup with a sanding sponge. This is a 400 grit sanding sponge, and I'm running it parallel to the details on the underside of the hull. I have found that if I'm very gentle with the sanding sponge, the bumps left behind where the 3D printing support attached to the hull can be removed while preserving the details on the hull. There's a bit of a fine line here between undersanding and then having a bump left behind but then good crisp detail, and oversanding and completely removing the bump but then also removing some of the detail. I think I've walked the line fairly well for these boats. Once I'm happy with the state of the boat, painting can begin. As with every boat that I've painted so far for this ship, I start with the color low in the hull, work my way up and out. The color scheme that I'm using for these boats is going to be the same across all three types. The lowest level will be painted in XF24, that's a dark gray. After giving the XF24 some time to dry, I do what is probably the most tedious part of this painting process, and that is masking off the bottom of the hull. That is the biggest complaint that I've had with these boats, that in all of them it's very difficult to get access to this area underneath the details inside the hull. Fortunately, with 1mm masking tape and a lot of patience, I am able to get all the masking tape into the hull and properly mask off those boards at the bottom. Once that is done, I spray the next layer of paint. This is XF78 Wooden Deck Tan. Once the wooden deck tan has dried, I apply masking tape to the areas that should be in wooden deck tan that run parallel to the sides of the hull. For the benches that run through the center of the boat, those I will have in the end in wooden deck tan, but for now I'm not going to worry about their color because I'll brush paint them later. They will be easy to brush paint because they are in effect floating. So with that in mind, I then paint the boat in XF2 white. Since that is all the airbrushing that I'm going to be doing, I can now remove all of the masking tape, and now is the time to finish the details on the inside of the boat. That mostly involves painting these benches with XF78. As you can see, it's very easy since they are in the air, so to speak. The next steps for these 27-foot whalers is weathering, and I'm going to be doing the weathering for all of these boats together, so I will put them aside and move on to the 30-foot gig. The 30-foot gig is very similar to the 27-foot whaler. It's just a little bit longer and narrower and has this plank that runs down the midline. That does make masking a little bit more complicated because there's even less space to move around. But other than that, it's going to be mostly the same as before. So as before, I remove it from its base using the exact same method as with the 27-foot whaler, and then spray the inside of the boat in XF24 dark gray. The bottom of the hull is then masked off, and then XF78 Wooden Deck Tan is sprayed on the surfaces that should be raw wood that run parallel to the side of the hull. Once the XF78 has dried, it is then masked off, and then the inside of the hull is sprayed in white. Once I'm happy with the state of the paintwork so far, I move on to the final details, painting them with XF78 using a brush. The 30-foot gig is then set aside with the 27-foot whalers to be weathered later. Moving on to the 32-foot cutter. The 32-foot cutter is longer and wider than the other variants of boats that I've been working on in this video, so you would think that would make it easier to work with, but it has extra planking inside the hull, which actually constrains the area quite a lot. You'll see that in a bit when I'm doing painting. Nevertheless, the starting point remains the same. The boat needs to be removed from its base, first by breaking off the delicate support struts and then using pliers to rip out the more sturdy ones. Once the boat is off its base, the support struts internal to the hull are removed, and then the exterior of the hull is cleaned up with sandpaper. The inside of the hull is painted in XF24 and then masked off. XF78 is then used to paint the components that run parallel to the side of the hull, and then once dry it is also masked off. Following that, the inside of the boat is sprayed in XF2 white. After that, all the masking tape is removed, and the benches inside the hull are painted in XF78. While I'm painting these planks, you can see that there is a plank in front of the bench that is vertical. That's what I was talking about there being additional details in this boat that makes it a little bit more constrained at the bottom of the hull. I had to mask around those. It also makes this step, painting them, just a little bit more tricky, because I'm getting that brush just a little bit more closer to the deck and the sides of the hull. In a few instances I did overshoot a little bit, so I had to come back and touch that up as well. That concludes the painting of the color coat for the boats, but there's still a few more components that need to be painted. But before I paint those components, I need to do a little bit of assembly of photo etch components. It's very simple. It's just these davits. There are 4 of them. They need to be cut off of their fret and then folded in half and glued together. They're glued together using extra thin super glue that I apply with a wire. Once bonded together, they are painted in XF53. This is the color that I'm using to represent HMS Hood's superstructure. Other things that need to be painted in XF53 are the cradles. All the cradles for all of these boats get painted in the exact same color. All of it is XF53. And of course, there is one other thing that needs to be painted in XF53, the exterior hull of all of the boats. I use the same method to paint all of the hulls for these boats. I stick them upside down onto a piece of masking tape and then carefully spray such as to not get any paint on the inside of the hull. After giving the color coat some time to dry, it can be protected with a gloss varnish. This is going to assist with the weathering process. It's going to protect the paint such that the solvent from the panel line doesn't damage the color coat, and it'll help the panel line move towards the details. I'm using Mr. Color GX112. It's a super clear UV cut gloss varnish. The UV cut is a nice extra feature to have. It'll just add that little bit more protection to the paint. It was at this point that I realized that the davits were missing a little bit of detail. I had forgot to paint their cables in black, so I just quickly painted it in black before spraying them with the gloss coat. Fortunately, all of the boats needed to be flipped the right way around so I could spray the inside with the gloss coat. So while I was doing that, I also sprayed the davits. After giving the gloss coat enough time to fully cure, panel line can be applied. This panel line is thinned roughly 2 to 3 parts solvent to panel line. This will just help it flow even more easily towards the details and leave less residue that needs to be removed. Applying panel line is not a precise job. I simply slap it on wherever I want it and it will flow towards the details. It is especially easy if you thin it out a bit like this. The panel line needs around 20 minutes to dry, and once fully dried it can be removed with a cotton bud that has been dipped in solvent. The cotton bud works quite nicely here because it isn't going to get too far into the details, so it'll only remove that excess residue that's on a smooth surface. For the most part, I'm happy with the level of panel line on the inside of the hull, but I want to just tone it down a little bit. To do that, I'm using a brush wet with solvent to help dilute it a bit. Obviously, earbud wouldn't work in this scenario. I wouldn't be able to get it into the lower areas of the hull. After leaving the panel line and its solvent to dry for a couple of hours, it can then be sealed in with a flat coat. This is XF86 flat clear. The boats, their cradles, and the davits are now fully painted and weathered and ready for installation on the model. Starting with the inboard boats, the 32-foot cutter that goes at the bottom of this stack is installed first. Of all of the boats that I'm going to be installing today, this is the only one that has markings directly on the deck indicating where it should be placed. After removing the cradles from the base and filing the bottom smooth, install them in the indicated location using extra thick super glue. I use a short piece of brass wire just to check the alignment. I want to make sure that the notch in the center of the cradle is properly aligned such that when the boat is placed on the cradle, it runs parallel to the midline of the ship. Once I'm happy with the position of the two outer cradles, I position the inner cradle and once again use the wire to check its alignment. After making any necessary adjustments, I reinforce the bond to the deck using extra thin super glue that I apply with the wire. Next, I'm going to install the 30-foot gig. This is installed on top of the 32-foot cutter, so these cradles need to be installed in the 32-foot cutter. After just checking which of these benches the cradles should be installed on, I proceeded with installation. Starting with the aftmost cradle, it's fairly obvious where it must go. There really isn't choice here, it has to go on this last bench, so I installed it over there. And then looking to the forward cradle, I installed it at the second most forward bench, simply because in that position it would allow me to more evenly position the middle cradle between these two. For the installation of these cradles, there really isn't much space for them to move laterally, so I was able to just install the cradles in the correct location without having to wonder if they are in the correct location. They can only really go in one place. Once the cradles were properly bonded to the 32-foot cutter, I placed the 30-foot cutter in the cradles and then glued the 30-foot cutter to its cradles. Having them loose would make this a bit more complicated to handle and position on the ship. The entire cutter/gig assembly was then placed on its cradles on the model. Now for the last boats, the 27-foot whalers. Since the davits are going to make working in this area a little bit more constrained, I'm going to first install the cradles, put the boat on the cradles, and then install the davits. I did do a fair amount of checking with the davits before actually gluing down the cradles to ensure that everything goes into the correct position. But other than that, the process is exactly the same. First, install the outer two cradles and then place a section of wire on the notch in those cradles to ensure that it runs parallel to the midline of the ship. Once happy with its orientation, install the middle cradle and once again use the wire to check its alignment. Once happy with the alignment, place the boat on the cradles. On the side of the ship where these davits connect, there is a small hole which helps position these davits. To install the davits, I applied small drops of extra thick super glue to the side of the davit and then placed it in contact with the hole in the correct location. Since I had pre-checked everything, the alignment was good and they went on quite easily. The exact same process is then repeated for the port side of the ship. With that, the installation of the boats for this model of HMS Hood is finally complete. It took 4 videos and a lot of work. Even though there wasn't much construction in these videos, it was basically all painting. That painting of such small and detailed components was quite intensive. Not gonna lie, I'm quite glad that this is done. In the next video, I will continue working on the shelter deck area of this model, but it is now finally time to start installing some weapons. To that end, I'll be installing the 2 aft Vickers machine guns and the 3 pom-pom mounts. If you would like to support this channel or see how this ship looks when it is completed, then please subscribe. Thanks for watching. Cheers.